increasingly the clownery can no longer be blamed on Russia or Russian propaganda. Besides, the experts, the more in tune ones, but also the less capable ones, have dissected Russian propaganda quite a bit. So the next talking point is, well, the Chinese propaganda. Now, the thing is that there is such thing as Chinese propaganda, but over the next several years, I would dare to venture to say, we will see a lot of clownery in the West blamed on Chinese propaganda. So in order to be prepared for that, the proposal for this season of the Propaganda Basement is for us to read, well, Chinese propaganda. So at least we be accustomed to what exactly are we talking about. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of Season 4 of Propaganda Basement. So, in this episode, as well as in this season and in the next season, these two seasons, 4 and 5, will be dedicated to what has been dubbed as the Global South, which in itself is a clownery because, well, the Russian Federation claims to be part of the Global South. We'll have plenty of time during these two seasons to dissect what does that even mean, and of course to show a lot of diversity within the so-called Global South. And hopefully by the end of the 5th season we'll be able to effectively prove that the propagandistic point that there is such thing as a unified anti-Western Global South is, well, a propagandistic point and a lie. But until we get to that, in this season we'll just read Chinese propaganda. I went to great length to find a pile of China Daily, which is a magazine of a sort, a newspaper published by the Chinese Communist Party in English, and it is dubbed as a global weekly and basically contains every single week what the CCP wants its adversaries or even its partners from the West, what the CCP wants them to read, to know, to speak of, and so on and so forth. So it's a decent pile. Hopefully we'll read one newspaper per episode, and hopefully by the end of this season we will have a decent idea of what exactly Chinese propaganda means. And there are, of course, two reasons for why I insist on this. One of them being, of course, we will see increasingly throughout this year being 2025, even though it's 2024 when I'm taping this, throughout this year and in the next several years we will see a lot of clownery in the West blamed on Chinese action, CCP action, or Chinese propaganda. And of course, in some cases that will be true, although of course in other cases that will be false. Now, one way to discern which one is true and which one isn't is to become familiar with what Chinese propaganda actually means. So that would be one reason for why this would be necessary, at least for those who study propaganda for pleasure or for work. And the second reason being, of course, that we haven't done this yet, and it's a very good exercise to be familiar with other parts of the world and how they view, how their elite there, especially China, where it's an authoritarian elite, not that everywhere else isn't, but at least in China they're very much upfront about it. So it's a very good exercise, and of course because, well, there's not much left to talk about when it comes to Russian propaganda, so, you know, we might as well move to something insufficiently covered. I'm pretty much willing to bet that by the time these first episodes hit YouTube, eventually some expert will suddenly have revelation that, oh my goodness, yeah, probably we should talk about Chinese propaganda, because that's how usually things go. The sofa says something, and then in a few weeks someone else finally figures it out that, yeah, probably it was a good idea to talk about that. So anyway, right, so with that said, China Daily, Global Weekly, October 20 to 26th, 2023. So we'll go through this one first, and then, of course, slowly through this pile. I think I have them arranged somewhat chronologically, although I could be wrong about that. Nevertheless, so this first newspaper from my pile is focused quite a lot on the Belt and Road Initiative, which, as I've said during the Southeast Asia series, is a Chinese project that is both about infrastructure and logistics, but also about propaganda. You will see quite a lot of this thing that, China is able to build fast and everywhere, as opposed to everyone else who can't. Now, of course, please don't notice severe incidents such as this one in Serbia, where a Chinese built piece of infrastructure collapsed on everyone, killing a few people and nearly taking down Vucic's regime in Belgrade. Hopefully, in the next season, we'll also read Serbian newspapers. Not about that incident, though, but in any event, something similar. So, page 2. Xi Jinping, now again, if you feel like you're reading North Korean propaganda, it's because, it's not exactly too different. So Xi vows stronger ties with North Macedonia. President Xi Jinping exchanged congratulations on October the 12th with President of North Macedonia, Stevo Pendarovski, on the 30th anniversary of establishing diplomatic relations between the two countries, with both leaders vowing to promote bilateral ties. In his message to Pendarovski, Xi said that over the past 30 years, China and North Macedonia have deepened mutual trust, and that their traditional friendship has been renewed. Both countries have accumulated valuable experiences in cooperation on infrastructure, there you go, infrastructure construction, the learning of each other's civilization, and health and other fields, having achieved fruitful results, Xi said. Pendarovski said that the two countries share common interests and boast a huge potential for cooperation. He expressed North Macedonia's readiness to strengthen cooperation with China to promote common development and improve the well-being of the people of both countries. Now, of course, frankly, nothing has been said in this communique, but as you will notice as we're reading through this pile of newspapers, we'll see a lot of articles like these. Now, the point of these articles is not to say something in and of themselves. Now, of course, I just read the entire communique to you, and of course, it says nothing. It says, well, let them things be good so they don't be bad, as we say sometimes here in Romania. It doesn't say anything important. But what it does say is, what it does do is add to a pile of articles, which then CCP shills use to say, well, look, the Chinese diplomacy is top tier. It pays roughly equal attention to third and second and first world countries, and it's just trying to be an agent of peace and prosperity. You will see a lot of this. China as the agent of peace. Now, of course, when I'm taping this, this hasn't happened yet, but I fully do expect sometime in 2025 to see some attempts, at the very least, of Russo-Ukrainian negotiation with Chinese mediation. Now, I doubt that will happen, but there will be attempts attempts at that, and there will be some sort of agitation and propaganda, at the very least on social media level, if not straight up at governmental level, where they will say, well, why don't we try mediation by China, because China is so peaceful and honest, and so on and so forth. So the reason that kind of propaganda will have some adherents, will have some people believing it, is precisely given by these kinds of communiques in the central propaganda organ, which is China Daily, which is again the more posh and more polished version of the Global Times, or the Globalist Times, as I sometimes call it. And the Global Times, if you remember when we were doing the World SOFA report, we would use that one for clownery purposes. The Global Times is the more tabloid version of Chinese propaganda. China Daily, which we're reading in this season, is the more polished version, which tries to be a bit more serious. And it is aimed at, well, how should I say it? Because I don't want to sound necessarily arrogant, but nevertheless, it's true. It's more or less aimed at midwits in the academia in the West, basically. So you will see a lot of people who seriously think of themselves as being very intelligent and sophisticated and shit, who will take their talking points from China Daily, either directly or indirectly, because as we'll progress, you will see a lot of the talking points from this newspaper then present in all sorts of Western publications and initiatives without explicitly mentioning that the idea came from China Daily or from the CCP. That's basically how this works. So that's why reading this paper is so important, because we get to see where some of these ideas come from. So yeah, all right. Xi, initiative full of vitality. Now, when I read this headline first, the first thing that came to mind was Alex Jones with the super vitality. Anyway, President calls for embarking on new journey of cooperation toward another golden decade. So anyway, it's one of those many chats by Xi Jinping with his friends at the CCP level. And then there's a picture here with Xi Jinping and his wife. Group photo with other leaders of state and their spouses attending the third Belt and Road Forum of International Cooperation. As I said, this particular newspaper, this edition, is Belt and Road Initiative über alles. But further down, since we're talking about Russia earlier, China and Russia vow to advance ties. Xi and Putin call each other friend as they agree to strengthen mutual support. Now, there is a non-zero chance that by the time I publish this video, sometime in 2025, this article to look pretty much silly. But nevertheless, even if that doesn't happen by the time I publish it, by the end of this decade, for sure, this particular article will sound silly. Nevertheless, President Xi Jinping underlined China's readiness to enable a higher and deeper level of regional cooperation between the Belt and Road Initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union, driving talks with President Putin on October the 18th, 2023. Once again, friendly reminder. The two leaders met shortly after the conclusion of the opening ceremony of the third BRI Forum in Beijing. It marked the 43rd meeting between the two leaders since 2013. Their last meeting was held in March when Xi made his 9th visit to Russia. Xi started the conversation by calling Putin my old friend, saying that Putin's attendance at the forum for the third time in a row demonstrated Russia's support for the initiative. Our political mutual trust is deepening. Our strategic cooperation is close and effective, especially the part where China colonizes Russia, but of course we won't say that. And our bilateral trade volume has reached a historic high. Of course, there's no one else to trade with. Moving steadily towards the 200 billion goal that we jointly set, he said. $200 billion at the level of the Chinese economy, that's peanut change. Anyway, major infrastructure projects, including the China-Russia East Route natural gas pipeline, have been put into operation, delivering tangible benefits for the people of the two nations, he said. Well, yes, except the volume traded through there is basically irrelevant, at the scale of Gazprom's operations and at the scale of China's consumption, and people don't realize just how much China consumes. Furthermore, the two leaders have also established a good working relationship and a deep friendship over the past decade. China hopes that the China-Mongolia-Russia natural gas pipeline project and cross-border tourism cooperation along the Great Tea Road will make a substantive progress to develop the China-Mongolia-Russia economic corridor into a route of high-quality connectivity and development, she said. Well, it's been almost 2 years since this article was written, and it's nowhere near close to happening. So there's that. He emphasized that developing China-Russia relationships featuring permanent good neighborliness, comprehensive strategic coordination, and win-win cooperation is a long-term commitment rather than a temporary fix. Yeah, of course. We believe that your initiative to further promote the historical Silk Road traditions, which you proposed 10 years ago, has now become an internationally recognized public good, Vladimir Putin said. Russia is willing to closely communicate and cooperate with China within multilateral mechanisms such as BRICS, the grouping of emerging economies, whatever, and to uphold the international system based on international law and promote the establishment of a more just and equitable global governance system. Yeah, speaking of BRICS, when I'm taping this, there has been over 2 months since the 15th BRICS summit, which was held in Russia at Kazan, I think. I hope I'm not saying something really stupid. In any event, the BRICS summit that was held in Kazan, it was happening while I was above the Atlantic. I was coming back from Colombia. And the main talking point in the West was, oh, look how many people are attending Putin's summit in Kazan, and therefore it seems that Russia's isolation on the global stage isn't exactly working. Well, okay, but then the summit concluded, and the final statement of the summit was so ridiculous that not even China Daily bothered to publish it. Of course, the third biggest economy of the BRICS group, that will be Brazil, just refused to attend. The official reason was that Lula da Silva had a small accident as he was taking a bath. No, seriously, that was the official reason. The realistic reason, which was being discussed while I was in the region, was that basically the guy doesn't want to be in the same picture with Putin, even though this year in 2025 the BRICS summit will be held in Brazil, so we'll see what happens with that. It's quite a long time since from when I'm taping this to the next summit. Nevertheless, it should be noted that even in the China Daily, the CCP doesn't see it necessary to say more about BRICS, even in a propaganda article like this, which is of course something that if I were an ideologue at the Kremlin, that would be quite worrisome. But then again, I'm not an ideologue of the Kremlin, so therefore it's their business. But they should be worried about this, because if your own permanent friend and ally, as they sometimes call each other, Xi Jinping and Putin, if your permanent friend and ally doesn't see a reason to talk in his wide reach platform about BRICS, maybe he doesn't give a shit. And if that is the case, that's quite problematic for Russia's economy. But hey, what do I know? Meanwhile, Xi's book issued in 5 more languages, 5 new foreign language editions of the Belt and Road Initiative, a book of President Xi Jinping's discourses on BRI, were launched in Beijing on October the 16th. The new editions are in Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, German, and Japanese, in addition to the previous in English, French, and Russian. The book has 42 articles excerpted from Xi's speeches and remarks on the BRI between September 2013 and July 2018. So yeah, what I want to emphasize by this is that the CCP puts in a lot of emphasis, puts in a lot of energy, propagandistic energy, into the Belt and Road Initiative, mostly because the actual energy, and that is to say in building the infrastructure that they said they would, has been kind of put on hold. I mean, I've showed you before this footage. This is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's the only portion of the whole initiative that actually works as intended and fully works, which is of course the Lao-China Railway. So, you know, other than this portion in China's backyard, effectively, Everywhere else, it just doesn't work. Now, of course, it also wasn't particularly good for the Belt and Road Initiative that Italy withdrew from the initiative. As long as Italy was a member of it, there was always this way of saying that, look, even G7 countries support our project, so maybe there is something good about it and whatnot. That's how Chinese shills used to frame it. So it helped them quite a bit. But now that China withdrew from that initiative, well, it became a little bit more complicated. So as a result, now the CCPs has been trying quite a lot to revamp this, at least on a propaganda level, because, well, they started even since with the pandemic project, if you remember. Oh, look, China can build hospitals within a day, and they can do this within a day, and they can do that. So why not trust them more on infrastructure, which, of course, you may think that it's not really that important, but it really is, because Chinese contractors can bring in a lot of hard currency back to China if they manage to get some infrastructure contracts, which are, of course, usually very expensive. So yeah, carrying forward mutual benefits, President Xi talks with national leaders at the forum, stresses deeper strategic partnerships. So here you go. So we got Gabriel Boric, the president of Chile, Joko Widodo from Indonesia, of course, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, who's ever since this picture was taken, things have changed a little bit. Same with Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić. In 2023, when this article was written, the relationships between the leadership of Serbia and the leadership of China were quite warm. Now, not so much. After the Novi Sad incident, things have gotten a little bit more complicated. Shavkat Mirziyoyev of Uzbekistan, we've talked quite a bit about Uzbekistan, and we'll talk again throughout this year of 2025 and 2026 about Uzbekistan, as we'll go again there. Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia has his own problems at home, so it doesn't any kind of foreign help can be framed as good. And of course, let's not forget, China does have it's not part of the Belt and Road Initiative, but it does have a huge infrastructure project in Ethiopia, namely the railway towards Djibouti. And Djibouti, of course, being a big port right next to the Arabian Peninsula, that's of course of strategic influence. And then, of course, it's Viktor Bazmeg, who just allowed Chinese police to patrol the cities of Hungary, which is, of course, a huge security threat. But, of course, you will not hear about that on TV because, well, that's not really important for the regime in the West, isn't it? So, this guy having Chinese police patrolling cities of the European Union ultimately is not a big deal. But, oh my goodness, he'd said something about, well, non-straight people. That's usually the biggest problem. Yeah, of course. And then, of course, James Marape, not of particular importance, I'm sorry to say. So, yeah. This list, nevertheless, is highly relevant precisely because we get to see who the friends of China are. So, we already got rid of this one. So, things can improve. I'm just saying. Yeah, digital connectivity, of course. So we'll talk about techno-optimism multiple times throughout this series. Digital connectivity is also a Chinese talking point. Almost always when you see digital connectivity, you will notice things about digitalization of businesses, and almost always with Chinese technology. The point there is not just the money, but it's also the information, because every time you use Chinese technology that is for digital connectivity purposes, especially in the context of business, that means you allow the CCP to spy on you, which is, of course, highly valuable for the CCP, not particularly valuable for Europe or for the West. But here's an interesting one. Page 12, call to deepen green focus. You see them coughing in ideograms over there. Senior officials, business leaders say BRI needs more ecological tie-ups. Senior officials and business executives have called for strengthened cooperation to deepen green development partnerships among countries and regions participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese vice president said the country will continuously support green and low-carbon energy development in developing countries, enhance investment in green energy, and foster technology cooperation. Translation: the CCP will try its best to promote its homemade technology, regardless of whether it works or not. The money is what matters there, and the geopolitical influence, and the more places that don't have a choice are gathered into the fold of the CCP, the better. That's the subtext there. He made the remarks at the high-level forum on green development during the third Belt and Road Forum on October the 18th. China will continue optimizing cooperative mechanisms and step up support for the further development of the BRI, adding that the nation will encourage businesses to undertake more green and low-carbon collaborative projects. Translation: more of you should study in China so we get to tell you what to do. Huang Ranqiu, Minister of Ecology and Environment, said China will focus on key areas such as green infrastructure, green energy, and green finance, and conduct policy dialogues and share experiences to collectively work toward green and low-carbon development with economies participating in the BRI. According to Huang, China has signed 46 climate change cooperation agreements with 39 developing countries and will continue to respond to the genuine needs of these developing countries and further increase support for their efforts to combat climate change, continuing to contribute to global climate governance. So there you go. This shouldn't surprise anyone. If this kind of discourse sounds familiar to you, it's because it's the same kind of discourse, especially this portion, right, with global climate governance. It's exactly the kind of discourse that Chinese influenced environmentalist groups in Europe have been peddling for over a decade. These days they're trying to pretend that maybe you misheard, maybe it's not like that or whatever, but if you push them hard enough they'll continue to peddle the exact same kind of discourse. Why? Because, well, they're all taking shekel from China, that's why. There has been even an investigation in the US, of course, not in Europe, because in Europe nobody wants to do this kind of investigation. But in the US, several investigations have shown already several times that most of these green/environmentalist groups, they kind of do coffee ideograms and they kind of do the geopolitical game of the CCP, which is a surprise to exactly nobody. But again, if you say this, and especially if you had said this in 2023, when this article was first published, this newspaper was first published, it would have branded you a conspiracy theorist, a loon, and whatever. But you know the deal, the difference between a conspiracy theory and reality is sometimes around 6 months or a year. So there's that. Okay. Then, of course, there is this one, boosting funding for African growth. New finance mechanisms can further advance BRI objectives in world's poorest continent. So as I was mentioning earlier, I mentioned the railway from between Ethiopia and Djibouti, which predates the BRI. China has been trying really hard to get to replicate the success of that one to other infrastructure projects in other African countries, with various degree of success, because, well, sometimes the corruption in Africa rivals the one in China, or sometimes even overtakes it, which surprises CCP operatives, and sometimes they have very funny reactions to it. But that's a separate story. And then there's this particular article which I found just very, very nice and very, very funny. I don't know if I should read all of it, but nevertheless, it's still funny. The collapse of China collapse theory. Nation's economy transforming from high-speed growth to high-quality development. Written by Harald Bruning, who is the director of Macau Post Daily. And he says, China and other major economies such as the United States, Japan, Germany, and India face a host of economic challenges due to a diverse range of factors, two of the main ones being the global economy's lack of growth momentum and the geopolitical turmoil globally. Against this background, each time China responds to a new challenge affecting its economy, the West's infamous China collapse theory rears its ugly head. For example, an article in the US newspaper The Hill last month was headlined "China's economic collapse carries a warning about our own future," as if the collapse were a fait accompli. While one article published recently in a Western media outlet, the East Asia Forum, a very important one, said, "Has the Chinese economy hit the wall?" Another, in The Strategist, posed the question, "Is China's economy about to go bust?" One of the best known proponents of the infamous China collapse theory is Hong Kong-born US-based historian Gordon Chang, who published The Coming Collapse of China in 2001. He predicted, albeit wrongly, that China would collapse in 2011. When 2011 was almost over, Chang admitted that his prediction was wrong, but instead it was off by only a year. He made it to the Foreign Policy magazine's list of 10 worst predictions of the year twice. What a record for an academic. I would suggest that Chang, who is in his 70s, write a book titled The Coming Collapse of China Theory, in which he could explain why he got it so wrong twice, so horribly wrong twice. On the other hand, Richard McGregor, an Australian expert on China, wrote an article titled The Collapse of the Chinese Collapse Theory back in 2011, in 2018, in which he said, "In Japan they call it the collapse of the Chinese collapse theory." The line, which harks back to more than a decade of dire predictions about China, is a joking way to describe the state of the Middle Kingdom's economy. Yet the collapse of the Chinese collapse theory is not a joke, it is a fact. The Chinese collapse theory is sheer bunkum. I like the very posh language. So as I said, this particular propaganda newspaper is for posh people. Needless to say, the collapse of any major economy such as the US or China would be a disaster for people, not just in that country, but also the rest of the world. The fact is that China's economy is going through a development adjustment process. Its transformation from high-speed growth to high-quality development, apart from its ongoing recovery from the impacts of the 3-year-long COVID-19 pandemic. So there you go, even in China, they blame the pandemic for their economic woes. Now, there's just one problem. Why is it taking so long? I mean, sure, the West has a tale of inflation and whatnot, and some people in the West are really upset, so upset that they vote for extremist parties and whatnot. But generally speaking, at least from an economic perspective, the West came out from the pandemic project pretty okay. Yet China didn't. But of course, such analysis would not be, you won't find it in the China Daily. Despite all this, China's GDP grew by 5.5%. Yeah, they built another ghost city. And the IMF has predicted that China's economy will grow by 5.2% this year, contributing about 1/3 of global growth. Moreover, Luigi Gambardella, president of the China-European Union Business Association, said that the resilience... Yes, of course, what would the president of the China-European Union Business Association say? That China sucks? Now, of course, they won't say that. Now, the reason I'm going through this article is to emphasize a thing that you will keep on seeing as we'll progress through these newspapers. Relatively obscure, dare I say irrelevant papers like East Asia Forum. I mean, I know what East Asia Forum is, but then again, I'm a crazy person. I actually follow these things. But generally speaking, The Hill, okay, that's a more known and mainstream outlet, but East Asia Forum, come on. And when they quote experts from the West, they always choose all sorts of these relatively obscure people. I mean, who the hell, if we stop 100 people in Italy on the streets, or in Germany, or anywhere you want in Europe, excuse me, do you know what the China-European Union Business Association is and who is their president? I don't think anyone, 0 out of 100 people, would even know this. I don't know, when they quote experts, they try to equivocate the most obscure people from the most obscure organizations, most of them with Chinese funding, with more mainstream places. Now, of course, sometimes that's not a bad thing. Sometimes non-mainstream organizations can have a more accurate view on things. But in this case, it's too self-evident that all of this is for self-serving purposes. In a similar vein, Nasdaq Vice Chairman Robert McCooey told the US-China Business Forum in New York recently that people in China are continuing to set up innovative businesses, and it shows why the Chinese economy continues to be strong for decades to come. And British online magazine Spiked said in a recent article that China's resilience to economic disruptions is different from that of the West. Yeah, that is to say it's worse, primarily because of the strength of its production fundamentals. Well, yes and no. Over the last year and something since this article was published, onshoring has been continuing. Onshoring will continue until morale improves. And let's just say that things did not quite work out as this article says. So yeah, I have cited these articles to show how nonsensical the West's claim of the Chinese economy's collapse, or China's economy being a time bomb, is. In other words, China's post-pandemic growth, which has its inherent twists and turns, continues to defy Western doomsayers. Well, yes and no. Now, of course, if you look at this, if you look for factual claims in this article, then you'll have very few of them. But from a propaganda perspective, of course, this serves China quite a lot because, well, as long as things stay this way, the investors who haven't made the switch to onshoring, that is to say to move their business away from China to somewhere else, they'll still maintain their confidence, and that's great for the Chinese economy. Point being, these kinds of articles are meant to keep the investors in a relative state of calm, because if the investors get scared, as they did and as they have over the last 6 or 7 years since 2018 when the onshoring initiative started, then it is a problem for the Chinese economy. Anyway, I guess that will be pretty much it for this first episode. We still have another 14 papers to read, and I'm sure the China Daily Global Weekly will give us opportunities to delve even a bit more into the Chinese economy and other facts about the People's Republic of China, as they're called officially. All right, so with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. See you around. Cheers.